How are we? I got a little worried because it was 2 years ago this weekend is the last time I was here. And I got a little worried I didn't get an invite back. I thought I said something wrong or something. I'm just joking. No. It is so great to be back. This is like family for us. Many of you know Heather grew up here. Like family. We got family, cousins, which is great. Heather grew up here in Sarnia, and Dan is right. During COVID, it was great to be with here several times throughout the COVID season and just helping out. Our church plant at the time had to move their gatherings to the evening, and so was able to kind of help out with some of the teaching and pastoral transition there. And it is so cool to be back and see all that God's doing. And I'm just so thrilled too, just talking to Pastor Rick a little bit, just where you're at and the stability there. So excited for you guys. You doing okay? Boys. So my kids were thrilled. My boys were thrilled that they got to sit up in the top of the balcony. So I'm just going to point you out. What's up? So this is like bringing back traumatic memory for me. I was a pastor's kid, and we had a balcony in our church. And I remember one time I was up on the balcony with my friends, and this was the days when the pastors used to sit on the stage. Remember those days? Some of you? Yeah. And I remember one time I was sitting up very top talking with my friends, and my dad did the old, in front of everybody, I think. At least it felt like it. And then kind of like called me down to sit with my mom. He didn't do that publicly, but you could just tell it was time to come down and sit with mom. So if you talk, brothers, it's coming. I will embarrass you. It's good. It's good. If you have a Bible, why don't you open with me to Matthew chapter 7. And I'm just going to grab the stool here. Matthew chapter 7. Want me to put these in my pocket? We're good? That's good. Matthew chapter 7. So there's a bit of tension here this morning because I am going to help and walk us through this very same text that Pastor Rick looked at a few weeks ago. Also, the tension in this is I have actually taught on this text here a few years ago through COVID. And I just want to come to it again afresh as you guys enter into this theme, Practicing the Way. Our church plant, which we were at for several years, was called Praxis. And this is at the heart. I had the opportunity to kind of do what I wanted this morning, but knowing that you're entering into these spiritual practices is like at the center of, I feel like, who I am. And so I thought I would help kind of lead you as a community into these things. Is that okay? If not, we're in trouble because the regular guy's not here. So you just got to nod your head with me. Is that okay? Okay. This week I had the opportunity. It was warming up on Tuesday, and left work a little bit early. And what do you do in Canada when the sun comes out? What do? You go to the golfing range. And it was just warming up enough to get some swings in without wearing a parka. And it was windy, but the sun was out, and it was like a beautiful day. And so I thought, this is my opportunity to work on my fledgling golf game. So I went to the range for about 40 minutes, and I could just tell the weather patterns were changing. You ever have that moment? The sun was out, the wind was picking up. And I could just tell. So I got in my car, and I started driving home. And I noticed as I was coming home down the west end of the city that all of these clouds were coming. And this cloud cover was coming in like dark as I'd ever seen it. And all of a sudden, it was like a flash. There I am at an intersection in my 2012 Camry. And this storm just comes out of nowhere to the point where it was worse than a snowstorm. I could not see 2 feet in front of me. The winds were coming and the rain. I had never in my life been in a vehicle or experienced anything quite like this. And this is like Byron, London. I didn't expect these kind of storms to come. And so the craziest 5 minutes of my life, I thought it honestly was going to be like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz and just be blown away. And then all of a sudden it went away. And these are just some pictures from our neighborhood, like literally 10 minutes later. Yeah, there's a bunch there. Keep going. Yeah. Nuts, eh? Just I don't know. So here I thought I was kind of being melodramatic going home telling Heather and the kids this was like the craziest thing I've ever been, and then started to see the pictures and realized out of nowhere this is what happened. Now, here's what I love about Jesus. I love Jesus as King and Lord, but I also love Jesus as the teacher. And what I love about Jesus is we need to catch this. He used very grab a holdable things in his culture to teach the people. He used images and sounds and spoke their language in that day. And I call it stuff of the day. He used stuff of the day to teach and elicit people's imaginations when they listened to him. And it's interesting because in that time and place, in the text we're going to look at here in the Sermon on the Mount, contrasting two people was actually a way to get people's attention. Like they didn't have cool illustrations or really cool announcement videos, right, to catch your attention. Jesus had to use things in that day to grab the audience in his way of communicating. And this is actually what he does. I know Pastor Rick looked at this text, but I want to look at it again in Matthew 7 because it's the end of Jesus' most infamous teaching, his most famous sermon called the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And really, this was Jesus' moral vision for the world. It was the way in which Jesus was presenting reality, what reality is under God's reign. And as the master teacher, yes, Jesus is King and Lord, but as the master teacher, Jesus, what does he do? He tells a story, as he does so often. You know, Scott McKnight says this about this parable. He says this parable is an invitation to imagine a different world and to become different people called to work for the kingdom in the here and now. So let's read it. Ready to read it? Matthew 7, 24 to 29. This is the end of all of Jesus' teachings. He says this, therefore, say therefore with me, listen up. Everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. 26. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell with a great crash. And when Jesus had finished saying these things, the crowds were amazed at his teaching because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law. Now, you've looked at this, but brothers and sisters, this is mind-blowing what Jesus does here. Think about it for a second. Some of you are engineered like I was, kind of as the Sunday school flannel board kid, right? I know the story. Guys, I know stuff. Some of you in the room, you know what I'm talking about? You just know stuff. You know these stories. But I remember reading through this parable several years ago and thinking, think about it for a second. What do okay, so we have two people. Person A, I'm going to do a little Jesus style. Person B. What do both of person A and person B hear? Jesus says both person A and both person B heard these words of mine. Both of them heard. Now, these words of mine, scholars are kind of divided on this. I think it's Jesus speaking to all of the teaching that he just gave on the Sermon on the Mount, which is a litany of his most really important teachings to the people that had come and listened, his disciples and beyond that had come and listened to him on the mountain. But I don't want us to not feel the weight of the fact that both person A and person B heard Jesus' words. And the stark reality is, as one builds on the rock and one builds on the sand. So does this leave us with a question? Nod your head. Validate me a bit. Okay, so you with me? Sunday school kid, I love the Bible. I love these stories. But it's crazy to me that person A and person B hear exactly the same thing. So we have to ask questions because there is very different outcomes, is there not? We just read it. One builds on the sand, one builds on the rock. One has good outcome, one does not. But they both heard the same thing. So my question would be, what influences the outcome of building on the rock? Is that a good question? I think so. Now, it's interesting. The thing that determines the outcome is very clear to Jesus. It's this word in Greek, poieo. Can you say poieo with me? Now you can go home and just razzle-dazzle people at lunch with your Greek skills. You know what's fascinating about this Greek word poieo? Is in Matthew 7 alone, I think it's used something like 7 times in 27 verses. It's translated different things a little bit in our English Bibles, but if you were to open up the Greek Bible, 7 times in one chapter, the same word is used, poieo. Do you think Jesus is maybe trying to get our attention? And that word is translated as, what do you think? Practice. To do. To put into practice. To bear. One of the ways we could think about it is to make or fashion or produce. 7 times in 29 verses, this word is used in Matthew 7. Poieo, to practice. And practice is actually the outcome of what it means to build our lives on the rock. Disciples, followers of Jesus, followers of the way, are called to do, to bear fruit, and to embody and practice the way of Jesus. Now this, are you following me? You picking up what I'm putting down here? It's not just crazy that it's not just about hearing. Hearing is part of it, but it runs much, much deeper than this. It's about action. It's about practice. And you know, I've just been thinking a lot about our obsession, especially in the Western church, with belief as knowing things about God. And Jesus actually speaks to a much deeper way than just knowing in our heads. It's interesting, actually, and I know I'm throwing some Greek words around, and to be honest, it's just, I'm really trying to sound smart. That's my whole goal this morning. That's not my goal. But, you know, the word faith in the New Testament is this word pistis. And you know what it's translated as? It's translated as loyalty or allegiance. So we've created space in the Western world, and I love the Christian church. I love it. But we have often equated belief or faith as what? Knowing stuff in our head, right? If I just know kind of the boxes to check and I know the stories, and in many ways, if I know the Bible, that is belief or faith. But in the first century world, that was not belief and faith. It was nothing less than knowing, but a whole lot more. Belief was allegiance. Actually, we have records in the first century of writers using this word pistis, faith or belief, and they would always use it as an understanding of allegiance to Caesar as Lord. And we know through the writings that it wasn't just about knowing stuff about Caesar, it was about following, it was about this allegiance to the king. And so this changes kind of our reality because belief is not just a set of truths in our brain. It is, if you think about allegiance or loyalty to someone, you think about the dimensions and the layers of that and what that looks like for you and for me. And I just want you to think about this as we talk about kind of faith and practicing. Think about this for a second. Jesus here in this text, the greatest teacher to ever walk the face of the earth, listen, he knew that his teachings on their own would not bring transformation. Now, don't kick me back down the 402. I'm not a heretic, I promise. But think about it. Jesus knew that his teaching on its own would not bring transformation. How do we know that? He just told a parable about 2 people who heard his teaching, and one builds on the rock and the other builds on the sand. He tells this story because he knows that it's our practices that help us build and practicing his way on good foundation. He knew, listen, a lot of us know Jesus' teachings. that does not necessarily bring transformation. How we doing? We okay? So what does this mean? Really what it means for us is, and this is what you're entering into as a community as you look at the practices, doing what Jesus did is what it means to follow him. So doing the things that Jesus did is the thing we see in this text as building on a firm foundation. And it's not just here. I love the philosopher James K.A. Smith. He's really shaped my life over the years. And he tells this story of how he wanted to eat like healthier. And so he was reading the great Wendell Berry about eating well and eating off the land. And he had his highlighter out and his pen out, and he's marking up this book, reading this book on healthy eating. And then he realized he was in the food court at Costco with his hot dog, right? Right? You can't say, who can say no to a good Costco hot dog? Let's be honest. Not as much the point as, it's interesting, it was an epiphany moment for him, right? Here I am filling my mind with information about healthy eating, and yet there I am eating the hot dog. And I thought, what a beautiful illustration for us as people who follow Jesus. It's nothing less than knowing, but the point is there's a difference between knowing about something and actually doing it. And there's an even greater difference between doing something and then actually wanting to do something out of our loves. And so that's what we want to push into. And I think this is where you're headed as a community, is that it's not just here, but we want it to flow out of us in the things that Jesus did. So what does this mean for the church? It's a great question, isn't it? If Jesus knew that two people heard and one put into practice and one didn't, what does it mean for the church? I think these are beautiful questions as we think about yourselves as a community and what the way of Jesus and the church should embody. I think that one of the ways we should start viewing the church, and I think I talked about this a few years ago, is that instead of the church being a lecture hall, and I get it, I'm on stage with the Britney Spears mic and you're listening to me and giving me your attention, I get that, right? But instead of the church being a lecture hall, I wonder if it should look more like a karate dojo, right? So I'm involved in sports, not karate, but I'm involved with a lot of minor sports. Sports is like my life, actually, with our kids, and it's beautiful. And it's fascinating to me to see that in basically every other area of life, we understand that it's actually practice that puts things into motion. As I work with these young kids, repetition after repetition after repetition. And I like the idea of the church looking more like a karate dojo, because it says we don't just fill information in our head. That's part of it. We need to learn, but then we practice it out. Mark Scandrett puts it like this. He does a beautiful job. Speaking of the church becoming like a dojo, he says, so many of us want to live in the way of Jesus, pursuing a life that is deeply soulful, connected to our real needs, and good news to our world. Yet often our methods of spiritual formation are individualistic, information-driven, and disconnected from the details of everyday life. We simply are not experiencing the kind of transformation that is the historically expected result of the Christ phenomenon, he says. He goes on, if Jesus of Nazareth demonstrated and taught a revolutionary way of love that is actually possible, alive with healing and hope, then we need a path for experience that revolution in the details of our daily lives. And he says this, simply put, I believe we need to recover a sense of immediacy and action in our spiritual poieo practices, right? Perhaps we need a path, what we need is a path for discipleship that is more like a karate studio than a college lecture hall. Information, my world now in the psychotherapy world does a lot of research on how the brain works and how the brain and body works. And as I sit with people in session and walking alongside people, we're often looking at the interconnection. Several years ago, 8 or 9 years ago, a guy named John Seal did some research on millennials, which I am. I know you're like, you look way too young to be a millennial, but I am. I know you're thinking that. And he did some research around kind of the brain science of this. the left side of the brain reflects the analytical kind of thinking side of our brain, while the right side of our brain is more the intuitive side. And Seal basically started to study millennials, and he also studied millennials and their relationship to the church, because he was wondering why the last decade there has been a huge exodus of millennials and younger generations out of the church and leaving the church. And he concluded that the West kind of has a bias towards the left hemisphere of the brain, the analytical brain, because of the Enlightenment and the Reformation. And he pushed into the reality that millennials are very intuitive, right? They're very right-brained, right hemisphere-brained thinking, and that when there's nothing that captures the imagination, sometimes the option is just kind of to leave. It's all been about analytics and information in the brain. He's arguing that one of the things we need to do is we need to think about the future of the church as intuitive, really accessing that right side of the brain. And he noted that millennials are abandoning Enlightenment, left brain, analytical thinking, and in return, they have been abandoning the church. But if you look at Jesus in his teaching, what is he often doing? He's using intuition. He's calling people not just to a subset of truths, he's calling people to practice, to embody with their very lives. And I'm sure there'll be more and more research about Gen Z, which will be interesting, as you know, and just the short attention spans and all. We need to be thinking through about our place kind of within the church. And maybe we need some more right brain engagement as we think about intuition and practice. And what does Jesus, again, what does he propose? He proposes this way of practicing. One of the things I've been thinking about my generation is maybe through even some of this research, people are leaving the church because they're leaving something they've never practiced. It's been about sitting and listening, and I am all for that. You guys, I am. I love preaching and teaching. This is an important part of what we do, but it should elicit and draw us into something beautiful and profound, and that's practicing the way of Jesus. So if you don't get the point here, it's about practice, not just hearing, but doing. And now here, you guys have a church staff that's saying, this is important. This is important. That to actually capture the imagination of a church community, it means listening, but it also means putting into practice the very things that Jesus did. And there's 9 practices that you're going to look at. But I've seen this on the ground. I talked earlier about young athletes and just seeing how practice kind of shapes and informs us. So I'm going to show you a video, okay? I'm a hockey coach. There's 30 seconds left in this game. The white team is the good guys, okay? The green team is not the good guys. This is like Southwest, it's Alliance Championship. It's pool play. White guys are down by a goal, 30 seconds left. We need to score to tie the game so that our season is not over, okay? And this is what happens. Play the video. White guy's trying to score on the green net. Puck goes to the corner. There's a kid out in front of the net, gets the puck. What does he do? Puts it in the net. Did you see that? Okay, so the season was over until this point. Kid in front of the net, gets the puck, buries the goal. We end up tying. We end up going to Alliance Finals. We lose by a goal in the end. Kitchener, we hate them. They're our enemies, right? So, Sarnia, you weren't even there. I apologize. It just is what it is. Now, this is a pretty cool moment because it literally saved our season. Kid goes to the net, gets the puck, buries it. Now, this is not like a parent propping up his kid, okay? But I know that kid who scored pretty well. He lives in my house. And I'm not trying to pump him up, okay? He lives in my house. The teaching point is that you see that moment, the season is over unless something happens. Puck pops out, buries it. boom, dad, just heart explodes. You see that in the moment, but this next video is what people don't see. Right? Hundreds, thousands of pucks every day. Not thousands of pucks every day. Hundreds of pucks a day, creating thousands of pucks over time. Right in the very same spot where in the most important part in the game, the puck bounces out, and guess what the instinct is? You do exactly what you've done over and over and over and over and over again. Now, I want to be careful to, please hear me, I want to be careful to not equate our spiritual life and following Jesus as a game or something to conquer, because there can be danger in that. But I do think what Jesus is calling us into, we know this, sometimes that private practice in his way, and of course the corporate practices that we do as a church, are the things that then unleash in these really real moments in our lives what it is to follow Jesus, right? Over and over practicing that, the puck bounces out. What do? It's instinct to do exactly that. And for some of us, instead of the mental ascension, or maybe in this place like myself, you know some stuff, maybe this is the journey towards actually doing it. Like maybe the next year, just imagine, and I know I'm not a part of this community, but I see what your staff and where you're pushing towards. Imagine the next year of your life where you would embody 9 practices of Jesus that could transform your life forever. Right? Sometimes we get in these moments in our spiritual lives where there's tension. Am I growing? What if we just did what Jesus did? 9 practices I know Pastor Rick and these guys have shared, but just throw up the journey of kind of where you're headed as we wind down here this morning. Silence and solitude, right? Creating space to be alone with God. Sabbath, I know you're looking at. Prayer, hospitality. Fasting. Scripture, right? Scripture's part of this. And community, generosity, learning to live simply. This is what it means to follow Jesus. These are the things we embody. We do what he did. And so this is a call for some of us that know a bunch of stuff to practice, to be like that one who builds their life on the rock. Now, at the end of that, what does Jesus do? At the end of the parable, he shares this massive, colossal crash. Just like those trees going into homes in Byron, right? That when you don't build your life on the rock, when you don't poieo or practice, it's easy to crash. And I don't think it's about hyperbole. I don't think it's about trying to be extreme. I think Jesus is trying to show the reality that when we don't practice and we don't put it into action, what happens, right? So it's a call to practice. Now here's the beautiful thing this morning. What we do, every sight, sound, everything you guys do as a community on Sundays is forming and shaping you. It's forming and shaping us. And the really cool thing is this morning, we're coming to the table for communion. And I think this is actually, when we talk about the practices, is something that, again, we embody. You know what I love about communion? In a minute, you're going to take, and the guys are going to lead us, and we're going to take the bread and cup together. You know what I love about the Eucharist, the table? It's not just about knowing here, right? My belief isn't just in my head. Guess where it is? In my taste buds. I taste the kingdom. In a minute, when we take this, we will taste the kingdom together. The very senses in our body, right? This is what it means to practice. So it's a call to you, call to me, a renewed call to do the things that Jesus did. And as we take part, may you just remember that this morning, that if anything, the Eucharist, the table, is a way in which we embody this. You with me? You with me? Let me pray, and the guys are going to come. Father, thank you for this time. Thank you for your word. Thank you that we can come to it at different times and places in different ways. And I just pray that you would make Lighthouse a people of practice, that this city and world would know this community not by just what they know, though that's important, but what they do. For some in this place, maybe there's a tension that feels like doing maybe has always been painted in a negative light. Help them in that. Help us in that. To see that grace isn't opposed to effort, but to earning. Help us to see that this effort, this doing for your kingdom is a beautiful and profound thing. And as we take part today, may you just be present